My conversation today is with two individuals at the forefront of consciousness studies, Carl Hayden Smith and Pascal Michael. Carl is the co-founder of the Cyberdelics Society and founder of the Museum of Consciousness, an immersive experience featuring interactive audio-based exhibits for cultivating altered states of consciousness. Pascal is an academic in the fields of neuroscience, psychedelics, and out-of-body phenomena. He's also a lecturer for the Aleph Trust and an international presenter. Carl, Pascal, and myself met at conferences in the UK and Egypt, and I quickly realized a convergence of ideas and concepts that enabled them both to contribute significantly to the work of modern occultists and magicians. Their perspectives are refreshing and academically informed, but above all, inspired by curiosity, open-mindedness, and a duty to humanity. I'm Ike Baker, and this is the Arcanum Podcast. This is going to be a very special episode because it's a little, for this channel, it's a little sort of left of center or right of center, but it's certainly not within the precise middle of our wheelhouse, which I think is a great thing. I'm here with Carl Hayden Smith and Pascal Michael. I just want to say this right out of the gate. Both of you represent to me a very unique expression of the academy right now. And, we've met at conferences. Carl and I met initially at Oxford. Pascal and I met at the New Hermopolis. And some of the work that you guys are doing and the perspectives that you're bringing to that work are inspiring. And I love to see it. And I'm very happy to have you on the podcast with me. So thanks for being here.
Thanks so much. Yeah, really cool to be here. Thanks, Ike.
Yeah, thanks, man. Looking forward.
Of course. So we're going to talk a little bit today about consciousness, transpersonal phenomena, magic, the future, etc. I think we might even get into some sort of UAP talk, but
Hopefully.
But so everybody likes an origin story, and I think for a decent amount of my audience, this will be an introduction to both of you. Not to everybody, but certainly to a few. So maybe one of you guys can lead us off. How about you, Pascal? How'd you get involved in your current milieu? What was the inspiration?
I don't know. I mean, it's a really diffuse answer really to that question. And like we were just saying before the recording, I think at the very early stages, the seed was really like my own spontaneous internal experiences. And later in life they become quite like destabilizing, but that there's still some kind of aperture into the numinous really, and it's always a confounder as to whether or not that's an internal brain thing or if it's something beyond, yeah, that then led me into neuroscience, like being really interested in neuroscience. So I did that for my degree, but I was very actually interested in the near-death experience, and from like in my teenage years, and I kind of went into neuroscience was fascinated by the brain, but it was really about the reconciliation of science and spirituality. If I learn everything I can about neuroscience, is there still room? It's like the kind of God of the gaps kind of situation. Like, is there still room to reconcile like something of a spiritual order or something? But then I did a master's in mental health sciences actually, and then I did my thesis on DMT, and I only did that because I met David Luke, and he's a really important character, I think, for if you're getting interested in what Carl and I are doing and what you're doing and how to like connect that, like, because his work is on kind of magic within a psychedelic context, so looking at psychedelics as kind of real magic. So I did my thesis with him, and then I did my PhD with him on near-death experiences and psychedelics. And then but now I'm getting like more interested in different phenomena, like the UAP stuff you mentioned before, and yeah.
What was there a particular experience in your life that led you to want to maybe try and find the numinous via the scientific, or was it just an innate thing?
again, it's always hard to like locate. I mean, I will always give credit to like my parents for sure, because they were very instrumental. And my dad was also Greek; he was Greek Cypriot, and so there was a lot of influence from early church experiences. It's just like quotidian as that, in the Orthodox Church, evangelical, Catholic. And I did have, it's not really in the other types of churches, but the evangelical kind of the more charismatic, and I was quite young and I would be touched by the Holy Spirit, as it were. I mean, I might not phrase it exactly like that, but ultimately it was, real ecstasy and elation and love and tears and connection. But my mum's always been in the new age, so they really represented these different polarities, and I'm trying to reconcile that at the same time. And so through lots of conversations over my whole life, really, with them. But yeah, I've had experiences, not just like these kind of, I don't know, paroxysms in my brain, just there, here and there throughout life, but in more maybe recent years prior to my PhD, so maybe experiences that would have been quite instrumental in me making those concrete decisions to get there. Yeah, like usually they're like parasomnic, they're like pertaining to sleep in some way, like very profound sleep paralysis type experiences, which like border on a kind of like what would eventually manifest as like a abduction like experience. I didn't get quite to there, but on that kind of cusp. And like near death experience, like dreams, which were follow the phenomenology of NDEs, but really like the most transformative part of those was the deep emotionality, like just like waking up like heart pounding, like covered in sweat, but like utterly filled with love, and like most of that moisture on my body with tears, of like just love of embracing people. So all these things just intersect.
Yeah, that's very beautiful. I like I didn't know that about you, so that's interesting. Carl, how about you, man? I know a little bit about how you got started on the current path. I feel like you're a man with a mission. Can you tell us a little bit why?
So yeah, I guess my journey started with an out of body experience at 27, and that was very specific. So that was non-drug related. Walking into a empty lounge in my friend's flat in Brighton, going out of body, feeling this sensation of going upwards, and then suddenly becoming a ginormous beam of light that was rotating in this wheel of light. So I was suddenly aware that I was one beam in like a 9 beam like wheel. And it was very profound, because I was like, what's happened? Like, it was the energy that I was feeling from being this beam. It wasn't like I was looking at the beam. I was the beam looking out of the beam. And that sensation of having done nothing to deserve this experience, but yet having this experience, not knowing the origin of it, and just having this awareness from this voice saying, you're not Carl. The first thing I was told, you're not Carl. You're having the experience of being Carl, but your body is inhabiting, your soul is inhabiting 8 other bodies in this representation. And then before I could really comprehend that, and the voice was also, look up, because you're in a larger body of light. You're only aware of this wheel of light, but look up. Before I could look up, my friend starts calling me from downstairs. And as I'm being called, I'm being poured back into my body. And as I'm being poured back in, I'm told 2 more things, which is there is no death, and tell everybody. And I think it was that tell everybody that I've really clocked onto as a sort of a message from that. But that was really, coming round, still standing up without any time passing was extraordinary. And I still to this day have no clue what caused it. The only special thing that it was New Year's Eve. It was it was like 1999 New Year's Eve, where the Y2 bug was meant to destroy the world, which didn't happen. But I guess that could have been in my background as a sort of a stress cause. But yeah, so that then led me on a bit of a quest to find out what could have caused it. So I looked for DMT for 10 years. When I eventually found DMT had nothing on that experience. It was nothing like it. And then that was preceded by, I then had a life review, which was course through, I believe, an NDE. And then that was an extraordinary phenomenology as well, which I know is a known phenomenology, but it's really extraordinary to have your experience, your life experience, just stop, and then for it to go into these episodic chunks in reverse. And I, of course, realized, even though I'm a crazy journaler, I'm always journaling everything, and still to this day journal. But I realized the futility of that journaling, because everything is recorded. Even the stains on the carpet when I was 2 years old were available in this review. So it was extraordinary to witness that, but also to utilize the out of body experience in the life review. So I was having this double consciousness. I often talk about this idea of double consciousness, but I was having my experience as we are now speaking. So normal state of consciousness, then my consciousness in reverse. And then I was able to leave my body, maybe because of the out of body experience. It gave me that literacy. And I went into a table and became wood consciousness. So I was in this triple consciousness, and I was able to go into anything I'd ever read or anything I'd ever seen, and become the authors of that. And it was like the true matrix. And it made me kind of aware that what we seem to be doing in life is we're a point of view driving a field of view, so that we get access to everything in the great liminal state that is death. We seem to have this. This is my hunch anyway, that we have this field of view experience where we can review our life and actually be everyone that we've ever experienced, even if it's just for a minute. It's important to speak to that person, I think, rather than just have them as a vague. So this is why it's really important to travel. Make sure you travel to the places you want to review. Make sure that you are the company you keep. So this is really my experience of the interpersonal, transpersonal. And then I've had all sorts of other things like, shape-shifting experiences. And like Pascal, I'm really interested in the liminal spaces. So whether that's the hypnopompic or the hypnagogic. And I've also experienced one extreme, the locked-in syndrome, where I had a full-on 8-hour lucid dream, which warned me off creating an AI version of myself through this amazing data set that I have of that that journaling practice. So yeah, I think that's kind of where I've led to in terms of my work, has been always really interested in mostly psychedelics, technology, sound, all the things that can really transport us and context engineer the situation that we're in. So the ability to move our point of view.
Yeah. To me, that, because I knew some of that, but I didn't know all of that. To me, it sounds like what you're elaborating here in practice, and it's likely that it's not entirely intentional. It sounds like a very satisfying modern day form of shamanism is what you're really all about experientially. Whereas a lot of that I find can be sort of this appropriated thing, this kind of artificial in the most literal sense. It is the product of artifice. A lot of that just turns out to be aesthetic, but this to me really sounds like shamanism in the 21st century. You've just done so much, Carl. You've with the Museum of Consciousness and Cyberdelic Nexus and all this stuff. One of the most interesting terms that I don't know if you coined it or what, but one of the most interesting terms associated with you and your work is technomagic. What is it, and how do you describe it?
Yeah, so technomancy is certainly not my term, but there are practitioners. It's really when you start to utilize, things like Twitter or the modern day social media, and actually start creating, sigil-like experiences. So utilizing these technologies to really bring back these practices. And I'm very, I've had one experience of creating a sigil, which wasn't actually me, it was my girlfriend that created the sigil, but she didn't charge the sigil. And I hope she doesn't mind me telling the story, but she was down to being BBC presenter. She'd got through, I think, 6 different rounds of the process, and was like, I'm going to try and create a sigil to really get this job. So she creates this sigil, and leaves it for me to charge. I don't know why she did that, but she left the house. I charged the sigil, and since then I've been doing nothing but TV and presenting. She didn't get the job, but I certainly benefited from that sigil making. So I'm certainly very interested in technomancy from this perspective of, cyberdelics. I think the whole thing about VR, if you think about it, is like the modern day shaman, like you mentioned. You're in this double consciousness, so you're fully aware that you're in the world, but you're in a completely different world in terms of the game environment that you've put on your face. So much like the shaman that's going into, the shaman's taking the medicine to cure you. You're not the one taking the medicine. You're lying there as the shaman goes into the body and actually tries to, use an Icaro or whatever it is to try and to heal you. So I think that there are parallels there. There are definite technomancy relationships, and I think they will become more and more prominent. A lot of people now are using AI as a modern day therapist, and I'm doing shadow work with AI. So that could certainly be another form of technomancy. And I think that, a lot of people, even though it is just not even really AI, where there's only machine learning at present, and it's really a lot of people willing into existence these sentiences. But of course, there is no such thing as sentience there, even though it mimics sentience and it mimics magic. I think that we're still really sort of very much scratching the surface of what technomancy can become. And yeah, we could spend the whole episode talking about that.
Pascal, so, and you talked a little bit how you were, how you've done your studies in neuroscience, and you've worked in psychological paradigms and models. But I'm interested to know a little bit more about what your main avenues of research and interest are right now in relation to this.
It's always a to and fro with whatever project I'm doing, in terms of coming back to like an oscillation between like a materialist reductionist thing, and then swinging back and thinking like the kind of being in the throes of like the sense of absurdity that I would even like consider that as viable when there's like seem to be overwhelmed by some new evidence that that you can't just reduce consciousness in that way, and it's really it's very mind-boggling in terms of this kind of marvelous progress of science, as sometimes it's called, in a very optimistic kind of manner. But it in a way it does illuminate so much about the natural world. I mean, that's what it's there to do, and so it is illuminating that natural world that otherwise wouldn't be illuminated without this empirical methodology and everything. But and so you become so convinced, like the power of it to convince you of it is very it's compelling. So, but it's not it doesn't lead to like a completion, like it's
it can't.
It
can't. It works. It has its own set of logic. It has its own set of rules, and so therefore it's a closed system. But you were expressing to me before we got on the call some of the more interesting stuff that you'd been looking into via like what would be interesting, I think, to the audience here, like the Mithras liturgy. Maybe you can touch on some of that.
Yeah, sure. I can. Yeah, and I'll try to link it to that question of yours about like the further implications for consciousness. But yeah, I mean, the Mithras liturgy, honestly, it just started as a vague memory in the recesses of my mind when, like, years ago, I think it might have been actually by Sarah Janes, and we were just talking about her earlier. Like, potentially, like she sent me a link to the Mithras liturgy just online, like just a translation of it. Didn't have any context or anything. I was just reading the unfolding of the experience, and I was like, holy shit, like this is really this is far out in terms of the phenomenology, and its description of these deities and other kind of divine characters. And so anyway, that was the vague memory. And then I more recently, like a couple of years ago, last year, saw Wouter Hanegraaff talk at Harvard online about the Mithras liturgy and how he's espousing that it is well, he describes it as the world's first trip report, right? And indeed, if you look into it, like it's pretty bloody obvious. And similarly to kind of what we were saying, going back to your original question, like the power that the, you know, let's say mainstream, like, you know, narrative, like the current prevailing paradigm, with different epithets given to it, you know, now scientific kind of materialism, like it's so compelling. And it's similarly in the humanities, there's this a similar like overwhelming driving force, just to such an extent that like in the humanities, you know, it'd be more like a constructivist or whatever, like to the extent that something that is blindingly obvious is just totally obfuscated, because you look at the freaking text, and yeah, like a third of it, as Musa says, is really a description, is an instruction, for how to develop this vision, and so that was like inflaming the academy in that kind of way, because they didn't want to accept that it was basically substances, because in the text it refers to this mysterious substance called contritus, and we still don't know exactly what it is. And like blue lotus, myrrh, what's the other thing? Those are the three main compounds. And I basically published a paper on this just recently, going into what the potential like candidates are for contritus, and it might be like Syrian rue, it might be acacia, maybe psilocybin. Like those are the three main like candidates. But then so I further kind of made this further inflammation by suggesting, well, it's not just a substance-induced experience, but it's actually of an obviously ufological kind of nature. And I realized I haven't really given any context to what the bloody Mithras liturgy is, but basically it's this, it's in the PGM, the Greek magical papyri, and yeah, so it's this Greco-Egyptian like magical rite of theurgy, and it looks like it's for the purpose of immortalization. So the initiate is trying to like co-identify with these gods, and especially Mithras, that they're trying to contact. So, but basically, I mean, I can just, I do have like a little thing just I can quickly like say online, and I'm just looking at here, as to what the obvious UFO-ish kind of features are of this liturgy if you read it. And a lot of it is really like is compellingly like Ezekiel, you know, when you read the Old Testament, the prophet of Ezekiel, in terms of the kind of Merkaba that he encountered, because it describes, so the liturgy literally says about God emerging from, quote, the disc of God, and, quote, the pipe protruding from it, which is, quote, the source of the wind and is the outflow of the object. And then again, when the, quote, disc is open, the initiate witnesses, quote, the tireless circle and the shutting of many, quote, fiery doors or gates. So yeah, and so Ezekiel again is talking about I saw a windstorm, an immense cloud, a wheel intersecting a wheel, and the liturgy also talks about rims, as that this object like sparkled like topaz, just like Ezekiel describes it. And especially this idea of flashing lightning surrounded by a brilliant light, followed by this like revolving of wheels, as is exactly in the liturgy as well. So again, like I go on and on, but like I don't need to read my whole article. But yeah, so in terms of consciousness, just to wrap that up, like who the F knows, you know, this is something which these people have experienced, but it's a kind of a technique, you know, they've done it deliberately to alter their state of consciousness, and it could, yeah, and it's for the express purpose of contacting this particular deity, which is very consistent with contemporary like UAP reports and like abduction reports. And so yeah, and if you think about the psychedelics like psilocybin, acacia, which has DMT in it, some species of it, then we know that, you know, these psychedelics can lead to these very profound experiences, which are again very much like contemporary abduction UFO reports. So they were just hacking that system in our brain that can, for some reason or other, access that. And you know, Carl maybe can talk more about how and etc. But I mean, there's Andrew Gallimore and stuff who's, you know, maybe a bit controversial in terms of that's like mainstream neuroscience is getting behind it, but it is I like how he's going much further than like people like Rick Strassman were in like 2000s, talking about DMT these abduction type entity encounters. And like Gallimore's like really going into the nuanced computational neuroscience as to how that may still be possible, whilst still reconciling these brain mechanisms and the realities of these things.
Yeah, that's interesting. To me, I'm a little bit more of I can't force myself to engage the way I did at one point with things like UAPs and just because it's too much of I've got enough on my plate. But one of the things that I it seems to me that is a viable hypothesis for that kind of experience is this sort of extra dimensional theory where they're not necessarily the way we're thinking of them in terms of being these discrete, solid beings that are like us that just have a hyper technology that we can't even fathom. That could all be true, but I think there's this eerie, and to your point, there's this eerie similarity between spirit interaction, apparition appearances as they happen in magic, as they happen in possession, as they happen in these kind of phenomena that ceremonialists and even psychics will be very familiar with. There's this very interesting sort of confluence in the way that these things could that they appear to have happened in the past in writings, and stuff that you're talking about here. But I'm wondering, yeah, I'd like to know what Carl thinks about any of that stuff, if he has any thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting one. From what I understand now, from having done 8 years at Imperial, having my brain scanned whilst being injected with DMT, and the amount of entities that flood in, I'm still very much on the fence as to whether they are in a parallel sense real, or whether they are archetypes or some sort of future self. But I think it's interesting that the work that Pascal's involved in with David Luke and a lot of these researchers are finding that, for instance, Chris Timmerman, a lot of the work is indicating that when you are on DMT, you are in a dreamlike state, and your brain's in a dreamlike signature. So I guess my take on it is that where we are now in London, it's very sunny at the moment, and sun is shining upon us. And when you take DMT or ayahuasca or changa, you have light bodies. You have this light body that is you see these entities emitting light. And when you do Bufo alvarius or you do 5-MeO DMT, you're experiencing yourself as light. So it's like we're relating to light in these different ways, in these different dimensions. And I'm pretty sure we're all of it all the time. It's just a case of, depending on which medicine or which technique you're using to get to that stage of light. And interestingly, DMT seems to be incubated in the dark. If you look at the Kogi tribe, they choose their shaman very early on in life, and they keep them in the caves for 9 or 18 years from birth. And they teach them about the world and again, their endogenous DMT levels. It'd be great to actually measure that. But I think the key thing is that, going back to what you're talking about, is that if there are abductions, I think what they abduct is your light body. It's your dream, your that intermediary phase between you being light and you being form. I think that's what's abducted, if there is such a thing. And I certainly have experienced, on Siloaska, which is a combination of mushrooms and Syrian rue, full on encounter, being on a in a flying saucer effectively, and knowing it's a flying saucer from the shape of the space and the incredible technology. This technology I could never imagine or never make it up. But I'm seeing this in the middle of the saucer. I'm seeing this scanner, which looks almost like a pod, because on the side of the wall, there's also the outline of the pod. So it strikes me that this thing was either going to scan me and then fire me off into the universe. And I joke that it had just Brexit had just happened that day. So I was in a foul mood thinking about how it's going to affect my university research and funding. And And so I was just not having it. I was all the entities were like, get in the scanner, get in the scanner, get in the scanner. And it's like the thing that with the devil, you have to invite him in. You know, it was like it was not going to happen unless I went in, and I refused to do it. And now I'm like kicking myself that I may have actually, you know, fully expanded in my very limited consciousness if I had have actually got in the scanner. But the vibe just wasn't right, and so I you know, I'm very as always very open to suggestion, and never, you know, I think belief is the death of so many things. So you know, I'm always open to these encounters, and I've had so many. In, you know, the first time I had my brain scanned whilst being injected with DMT was such an eye opener, because it's almost like they gave up the cosmic joke, because initially they were like, bang, showing me you're immortal, because they did this like sort of inverse 5-MeO experience where they just put it upon me that I'm this like immortal being, but you're in a human form right now. What's happening to you? Why are you in that scanner? We're the ones that scan you. What's happening? And I had to spend the whole time calming them down, which is an absolute role reversal, as normally, you know, it's like as McKenna says, dying of astonishment is normally the case. But I was literally having to be very pragmatic with these entities and explaining the situation. And so I think that, you know, they kind of gave up their, you know, their benevolence, and I really do believe that there are these encounters at the liminal stages of life and death where you do have these guardians or these helpers that transition you, and if you go into that space too frequently, you may piss off you may cry wolf. And so I'm working with Andrew Gallimore, and Andrew Gallimore's, you know, basically enabling this to be a space that we could enter permanently with DMT extended state experiences. And his vision, in fact, is to keep people in pods, suspended animation, and just let them live in hyperspace. And of course, this could be the next colonization problem. So, you know, even when I'm at Imperial going in every 3 weeks, I'm being told, what are you doing? What are you doing back here? Why are you here? What, you know, come on, you're outstaying your welcome. You don't need to keep coming back. So I'm really there as damage control in that project to try and make sure that, you know, we go a hyperhuman route rather than a transhuman route. And I think the transhumans, you know, they're mainly trying to outsource or to circumvent the human experience and they're very Gnostic, right? It's the Gnostic position. This is just a dirty body to be overcome. Let's become machine. Let's become nice and silver and like chrome and like and over, you know, do over the last man or whatever. But I think, you know, it's all up for grabs. And I think the more it's all about awareness. It's all about listening to people that have had these transpersonal experiences, because that's the best bet that we've got for what's likely to happen to the rest of us if we don't listen.
Well, it's interesting you talk about that. I have my own fair share of experiences in psychedelics and psychotropics and you know, I've done DMT and LSD, you name it. Even like in my 20s, I started having, you know, I was having these trips and having these experiences where I was meeting deities or entities, let's say, entities, and they weren't telling me what I was expecting them to say. You know, they weren't encouraging me to, like, you know, opt out and go on this grand cosmic adventure. It was just the opposite. They were telling me, like, what are you doing? You need to focus. Like, you have to check. You have to opt in. You have to engage with what's going on in your material life, because there are lessons to be learned. It's the whole purpose. This is one of the reasons you came here. So it's really funny to me that a lot of people will, you know, I think you talked earlier off camera about this disillusionment with psychedelics, and I think that part of the usage of psychedelia and with our like mainstream kind of like hyper commoditized, you know, lightning speed information systems, you know, a lot of people have created these little cubby holes, these little escapist fantasy islands for themselves. So, you know, what are your thoughts on that? Can we find a way through in a way that is healthy and productive with psychedelics? And I'd like to hear from both of you on this.
So let me jump in first. I think what you're touching on there is this commodification of altered states, and it's like McDonald's. Like, it's what can we do today to reach the next peak experience, and just chasing your own tail, just really trying to stay up. And again, that's another transhuman thing. It's this paradise engineering. How do we eliminate suffering? How do we eliminate all of these necessary human experiences that really are essential? I think that it's very dangerous when we start to really focus on eliminating all the things that, I mean, how many times are we learning through mistakes rather than learning through success? And I think that, yeah, it's really it's a journey from altered states to altered traits. So what you're focused on, and I think that any the average person will kind of move away from psychedelics because they see them as cheap shortcuts, or they see them as cheats. And I think that interestingly, Chris Timmerman had an experiment recently where he gave 5-MeO DMT to a master meditator, and the meditator was like, yeah, this is this level of what I've got to, but it's still like not there. It's not the true light that you're experiencing. There's something very limiting about that. And of course, a lot of people just get caught up in that, thinking that it's the be all and end all of non-dual experience, and then they get trapped, and then they think it's actually representative of death, and then they actually kill themselves because they prefer to not have to take the medicine. So a huge hunch, right? It's a huge hunch that's the case. And I think that you have to, you have to go through this. You have to get through this, and there's really no easy way around it. And it's the hikikomorization, I think, of so many things, whether it's living in VR, living in a psychedelic, living on ketamine, or so many people are like trying to avoid the human experience, and it never really works. You always come back to what is reality. It's the thing that is persistent. Whatever you come back to is that reality. So I think that it's also something to be cherished, because it's only very short lived. It's 1,000 months that we live as humans, 1,000 months. And I think that that's something people don't realize. People don't get that. As soon as I tell people that, they suddenly click, and they think, because you don't own anything. You don't even own your own body. So it's really about what can you do that will benefit not just the people around you and help the people around you, but will benefit the next 5 or 50 generations to come.
This is very interesting because this is, and I think a lot of people that are listening to the podcast that are specifically in the Western initiatory paradigms, particularly in Freemasonry. It's the entire telos of Freemasonry you're talking about. People think like, it's there's something nefarious and creepy because of all the skulls and all this. It's like, no. It's a memento mori. The entire trajectory of the Masonic mythology is distilling exactly what you're saying. You're not going to be here for a long time. You better build something for the next couple of generations to benefit on. There's definitely a point of convergence here, right? I mean, I think that's a really good way, a really good mile marker for knowing that you're on the right road. Is what when we're in agreement about these things. But how about you, Pascal?
I've been writing so many notes, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to fit it all in terms of my response to that. But I can say quite a lot. First of all, the Chris's DMT neuroimaging stuff, and this idea of if everything is just in the imagination or if it's real. It's interesting that he's in the latest study he found that it's the most recently evolved human-specific networks of the brain which are recruited when it comes to this peak DMT state, and that includes imagination, right? And so like you can think, oh, it's just bloody imagination then, isn't it? You can see the signature in the brain, but again, the whole concept of the imaginal, like from the original kind of Sufi sort of stuff, and then how it was developed by other people, like including Jung, like maybe it is the domain in which these things happen still, but it's the mediating domain with this domain. So that is what the imaginal is. Like it's still like it's, so they wanted to mention that, but and you're talking about the kind of this will lead into eventually what we were just saying with Carl. But these kind of more paranormal, I don't use that word. I'm like loaning that word from other people that use that word, like features of the UFO like kind of experiences. That when you look at it in terms of all of these reports in the grand scheme of things, like the technological aspect is completely irrefutable. Like people, and even the physical aspect, like yeah, I think potentially there is a abduction of the light body, let's say, but there are actually lots of cases where there's physical abductions as well. So you have to reconcile that as well. Again, we're coming back to this theme of the reconciliation of the material and the quote unquote non-material. And I did a talk for Richard Dolan last year in Rochester, New York, and that was the whole theme of it. It was like how technology actually, given, and this is what I was talking about at your conference in New Hermopolis, given the trajectory of where technology is going now, there is an inevitable spirituality which leaks into it. And this is like the technosis of Eric Davis. And so we are becoming godlike, you know, where our technology is going, it's already approaching that, and you know, in the near future, and it's exponent, you know, it will be like godlike. And so it went, and it's the Arthur C. Clarke quote, you know, any technology that's sufficiently advanced will look like magic, will be confused as magic. And I think these civilizations or these beings or whatever, they've got to that point, you know. So that's why when we look at we get confused, and we're thinking that it's purely a spiritual phenomenon. But I actually think, you know, who knows about all of it? I'm not claiming that, but a lot of it is going to be technologically mediated, but indistinguishable from magic. And so yeah, so that's and I'm going to talk about that again in California, in Contact in the Desert, the same idea, but mainly focusing on the beings, because yeah, there's so that, but I'm interested in the idea that they themselves might have been caught in this trap, and they themselves communicated to us about the inherent dangers of becoming too developed in terms of our technology, because they know it firsthand. So they're the ones which are going to have the highest authority in warning us, because they know it firsthand. And so when it comes to coming to what Carl was saying about Gallimore's vision with these, you know, just living in hyperspace forever, because his concept is that, well, that is the eschatology of everything, and we can just hack it anyway with this substance, so let's do that. But that's still the employment, in my opinion, the irresponsible employment of a technology with the use of this particular substance. It's like, you know, technologically employing the substance so that it's infused in our brain forever and we live in hyperspace. You know, that is a similar thing to other versions of you know, technological developments of a kind of virtual reality in a matrix. You know, just getting us caught up in another matrix. And so yeah, so that's similarly coming back to how psychedelics are not for that purpose at all. That's like exactly what they're capable of, but exactly not the point. And so it's coming back to our imminent reality. And similarly to the people that you're talking about, and Carl saying eventually people realize psychedelics aren't really the way. That's always been my lesson with psychedelics, and so I don't really do them anymore, because that's always the message. It's like, it's about here, it's about now. This is you're here for a reason. Like, and one important thing I think I'll say as well is that it's psychedelics work in the brain in terms of relaxing our beliefs. So we have like models about the world, about ourselves, and it's instantiated in the brain in a computational way, but they're relaxed, so they're loosened. So our assumptions are kind of brushed off in a lot of ways, and that very same process can lead to these visions of these other realities and everything. But in my mind, the most important assumption, which is relaxed, is that this reality in and of itself is not a spiritual reality. So coming to the understanding that really it was just an assumption about this, like maybe a false dichotomy between this world as the physical world and the spiritual world being spiritual. This is just as much as bloody spiritual as that, and therefore it like really imputes it with a new meaning and importance.
Yeah, and that's what you're saying there actually is a keystone of Iamblichian theurgy, and you know, somebody like Greg Shaw would be very would be very pleased, and I'm sure Walter would be very pleased to hear that too as well. There's this false unresolved dualism of here versus there. One thing that I was curious if you'd entertain us, Carl, for the audience. You mentioned hyperhumanism in contradistinction to transhumanism, but could you explain that a little bit for people that might be unfamiliar with what you mean when you say that term?
Yeah, sure. So hyperhumanism is really talking about the innate abilities that we've eliminated through the sort of very technocentric technology that we've adopted, whether it's your mobile phone that zombified you because you've been staring at this tiny little bit of real estate for so long that the love of your life walks past and you wouldn't even notice. So it's really about how do we understand that there's many abilities that we haven't developed, and the basic premise is that we may not be human yet. We may have been human at a certain point, and then we've taken the humanity out of the human. If we think about the really important skills like foraging, like understanding, your direction in space, like, if we talk about the indigenous idea that, they don't ask you how you are, they ask you where are you coming from and where are you going. So that real understanding of where you are physically in space, I think, is very hyperhuman. It's all about the endo technologies. So the sorts of, the darkness retreats, the fasting, the breath work, all the things that you can do without any external technology required. And I think that we're seeing a massive sort of fork in the road where a lot of people are either just going, yeah, I'm gonna install Neuralink. I think it's time. I think I deserve to be augmented with the latest corporate technology, and to get rid of that distance. I mean, Zizek talks about this digital distance and he wrote a whole book recently on the Neuralink, and I think that that's super interesting that there are people that are welcoming this, but most of the people I know haven't even bought a VR headset. So I see this kind of very transhuman thinking that everything's linear, that we're just going to have this linear progression, that but I'm sitting next to 10,000 vinyl records, and vinyls come back. CDs have died, vinyls come back. So we can't really predict what people will adopt and what people won't adopt. And there's been a sort of many technologies that seemed very like sensible on the tin in terms of that evolution, but didn't get adopted. So I think that learning about these other senses that may remain dormant because of the doom scrolling and the constant distraction. So it's really about not being a Luddite. It's not about turning away from technology. It's about utilizing technology in a way that is human centric, that's other species centric, that can, help, because hyperhumanism really is a bridge to hyperhumanism. So how do we be more humane to not just ourselves, but all the other species, and also understand that you're not this discrete human. You're actually half bacteria and you're covered in fungi. So you're more three queendoms walking around than anything. So if we don't even know what we are, how can we move forwards and really get the best out of this short, messy human experience? So it's really that in a nutshell, that we're using technology in a very destructive, not just to our own species, but to everything around us. And transhumanism is pseudoscience. It's this idea of uploading consciousness when we have no clue what it is. And long may that continue. The hard problem of consciousness. There's been various things happening recently, and maybe Pascal can talk about this. But yeah, that whole thing is that a lot of this stuff is built on massive assumptions and huge pseudoscience, and just outstaying your welcome. I mean, the average American is using enough resources, for 5 planets, 5 planet Earths. And if we can, and then if everyone wants to become an American in terms of those different parts of the world that want to get up to those standards, or lack of standards in some sense, then we're in deep trouble. So outstaying your welcome whilst using massive amounts of resource seems problematic as well. So I think that the whole thing's based on very shaky foundations.
Well, my question is, are we on a runaway train in your estimation? I'd like to hear from both of you guys. I mean, have people become sort of irreparably dependent on technology to the point where, right? Because there's this component that you're talking about that is super important because ultimately it has traditionally been, and this is I'm not talking about traditionalism, but I'm talking about even if you look at the philosophical canons of the great schools of, whatever it is, ethics or the humanities or theurgy, they talk about how humans are gifted with what we call the logistikon or the nous, right, which is the highest part of our soul. And why is it high? Well, it's in that, it's at the top of that hierarchy because it utilizes reason, meaning that it's the only aspect of us which is fit to govern the rest. And the other parts in the Platonic tradition being the desire, the appetitive and the desirous. So the things that are bound to the appetites and bound to the emotions. It's it's a 2500-year-old model of cognitive behavioral therapy. As I think, so I feel, so I act. That's I'm a little bit more of a gloom and doom kind of guy. But that's not to say that I don't think there's a way out of it. I'm sort of setting you guys up here to hear your own perspectives. I mean, how do we go forward? What does the future look like in your estimation?
I guess I don't know. There are different epithets for that, like cautious optimist or
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Like I was saying before about this constant fluctuation of fundamental worldview. Like I basically live in ontological shock from moment to moment, really. And the the it's, yeah, the default mode network. In terms of what you were talking about, higher intellect. We've developed these higher order executive functions and networks in our last part of our evolution as Homo sapien, and that is largely from like a neurotheological perspective. Like that's largely why we've developed anything like religion or spirituality. Like not only have those faculties become available to us, but there's a reinforcement of like motivation to develop these kinds of concepts and institutions. Because like I think of the default mode network, which is one of these major networks, which is sort of mainly mediates, let's say, our sense of like selfhood, um, as because it's abbreviated as DMN, right? And I don't know, maybe it's coincidence, maybe not, that it's demon without the vowels, right? It's like a weird little like Easter egg sigil, that it's pertaining to that. It's reflecting that idea that it's because, like I said, it's like the mediator of the self, and ultimately we are possessed by ourselves. Like we're always possessed, but it's not any other spirit. It's our own. It's our own construction of this sense of self, which has like quote unquote demonic, like effects in that it causes suffering. And I'm not like a hyper Buddhist that will really like ego bash in that way. I think there is a fundamental place for the ego as a vehicle, and this is coming back to what we're saying about the importance of this instantiation of existence and this physical life, and you can't have this kind of life without that sense of self, constructed or not, well, rather constructed in a healthy way is the goal for navigating this life. But so basically we've developed like techne, and it may be in a magical kind of way, it may be in like these Buddhist kind of ways that I've referred to, like just as simple as like meditation, to extricate ourselves from that kind of suffering, and not really to extricate ourselves necessarily from life itself, but in so doing we can be much more present in this very moment and do this life the best we can for ourselves and especially for others. So yeah, but it's also technology, not just techno. So we can develop technologies, and that's one of the main. It could be insidious. It could be like used against us in the future for developing like other types of technologies. But this narrative that it's technology is a really powerful way to progress humanity, individuals, in terms of flourishing. But it can also do otherwise. It can do the exact opposite. And so, yeah, it's not intrinsically technology, it's the use of it. Interestingly, if you've seen the last Black Mirror, I wouldn't recommend anyone to watch it because it's utterly depressing.
Yeah, I
But
can't watch
you,
that show. It
uh,
fucks with my head too much.
I wouldn't do it. I just like read about it if you're fascinated by the concepts and everything. But it is really it's just it doesn't it's like suicidal ideation inducing, like. But interestingly, it's not about the technology itself. Like, I just watched the first episode, but I hope there's a trend with the others because it's not just technology that it's a narrative against. It is the use of it. If you watch the first episode, it's like it's not actually the wait a minute. It's not actually the tech itself. It's the basically kind of evil deployment of it. But the last thing I'll just say is, yeah, it's what was I going to say about it? Transhumanism and Buddhism was in my notes, but in a weird, like, linking back to these kind of entities that we were talking about. There is a possibility that they that I don't know, is this appropriate to say in this kind of juncture, like the idea that they're like transhuman, really, but like instead of being extraterrestrial, let's say. I mean, the most compelling scientific theory, because all this stuff is not really fully in the academy, but an anthropologist really, to me, is the best theory for what these beings are, like in an abduction UFO kind of context, is like us from the future. Basically, they're like temporonauts. They're not like UFO, yeah, like ET. But
That's so it's so cool. You guys make up so many cool words. Tempura, tempura. That makes me think of shrimp tempura, actually.
temporal, yeah. But just the last thing is just that they themselves communicate the idea that it's that life is so important that we underestimate the value, the like cosmically intrinsically valuable nature of biological life, conscious life. Yeah, and that's been I've seen that in psychedelically induced encounters, which would otherwise think of as like extraterrestrial and stuff. Yeah.
And I like that point, because the thing is that we're verging on here is that people nowadays, and I want to, and Carl, hold whatever thought you have because I want to hear from you. But people nowadays, we tend to espouse this idea of like the value of life, and a lot of people will use that to sort of frame this idea that, well, if you don't have any value for life, then you either are okay with murder or okay with war, where there's a waste of human life, or on the other hand, you're okay with poverty and you're okay with. But there's these two, and this thought struck me when I was very young. There are two things destroy the human soul like no other: poverty and luxury, because there is also a waste of human life in that sort of like, I'm not even talking about classically sort of luxurious lifestyles, but lifestyles where, to Carl's point, all the humanity has been drained from it. And the things that connect us to ourselves and to our ancestors and to what it means to be a biological organism having this, spiritual sentient experience. We're completely abstracted from that context. That to me is a worse fate than death. And that's where I see us heading. And that's why a lot of the subtext of a lot of the stuff that I do out there in talking and speaking is to sort of point a finger at that. Is that like we have dehumanized ourselves, and like before we want to go out there and start learning how to do theurgy and be these great magicians, and you need to learn how to become a fucking human again. And that's it's like learning how to walk. But so, Carl, what do you think in terms of how do we go forward? Are we on a runaway train here?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's easy to be pessimistic. And I guess I'm more of a realist, but I really am. That's why I'm pushing hyperhumanism as hard as possible. And even hyperhumanism is not the right term, but it's at least something that people can get pretty quickly. That we are in danger of losing humans. I think that if you look at what AI is enabling, it's really the great outsource of creativity and even magic. I think a lot of people are losing will to live, because they, you know, they're creating, just make me a song, make me a poem, make me a, you know, and of course all that leaves you feeling is totally dead inside. You may have a song, you may have a poem, but is that really what you want? Do you want the machine to become the poem, or you know, the poet rather? So I think it's really that juncture where we either hold on to the things like imagination, like our creativity, like the things that we actually thrive from, and or we just say, you know, I you know, there is even this whole new thing now with prompt DJing. So it used to be algorithming. Now it's like a DJ hitting a prompt and then it will make a track, and you won't even know what it sounds like, but he's DJing it live. But yeah, I think that the machines are becoming more human whilst we're becoming more robotic, and I think people are getting that. People are realizing it, and there is a counter movement. There are people dumbing down their phones. There are technologies that enable us to become more aware of our humanity. Like, for instance, I'm using this like with my phone. I keep pointing this out, but if you smash your screen on your phone, you can actually plug in, this is an Android, but you can plug in a dongle, which is like literally just attached to a clicker here, like a mouse. And I'm able to control my phone from my hand. So I'm separating my hand from my phone. It's a barrier to entry, but I'm still able to use the technology. It's just at a distance. And it gives me it got rid of my RSI. So I completely healed my RSI. I put my phone in this like stand most of the time, and that means I never touch it. And it's just brought me back from the brink, like both physically and mentally. I've created this new way of inhabiting that world. And it's something profound, because I've been using it for 2 years. People think I'm insane. My brother thinks I've lost my mind, but I'm actually like, I've slowed right down, like in terms of my thinking. I'm actually like thinking about each letter to press rather than using slide or whatever. So it's like that idea where you used to post letters, and by posting a letter you would wait for a reply, and by that means you created the sensation of time passing. And that's what we need to do. We need to build friction back in rather than become more frictionless and have that Neuralink direct. So there's no distance, no time. It's you directly in the web. So it's obvious to me that, like we talk about Black Mirror, what's White Mirror? What does White Mirror look like? And I think that's the thing that people really thrive for. I mean, my friend, the Bad Guru, or Ebert, his name in America, he's looking for a hut in the woods. And the one without Wi-Fi is more expensive than the one with.
That's perfect. He's in the States?
Yeah, he's in the States. So
yeah, it makes sense.
That's the thing, right? So people are realizing that sci-fi, whatever the films are now, they're prepping us for the future. And I think that we've got to be very careful about the narratives that we tell, and the narratives that we listen to and that we take in. So that's why we don't watch Black Mirror, right? And none of us watch Black Mirror, because we know it will affect everything. But just absorbing that, he's got so much to answer for, because he's built the world, right? It's become real. Like what he's professed in his visions, in his magic, it's become real. So you know, it's about using technology to undo the damage caused by technology. Really, it's again, like you've both said, it's not about the technology, it's how we use it intentionally, and it becomes a magical act. It's your responsibility, because monkey see, monkey do. So now that I've started using my phone like this, everyone else around me is like, where can I get one of those clickers? Because they realize that they've gone down this very dark route where they're doom scrolling, and you don't doom scroll when you have that way of interacting with it. So there's a brilliant example. It's called the Forest app, which grows a forest on your screen when you're not touching it. And when a tree is actually fully grown, it takes a few hours. When a tree's fully grown on your screensaver because you haven't touched your phone, a real tree is planted.
Oh, wow.
So it's really about how do we get imaginative with how we're using the technology, because the people that have made that technology they're not interested in your ergonomics. They're not interested in your you know, whether you sleep at night, they're interested in sucking the life out of you.
Mm. Yeah, and I one thing that I want to add before I move to some closing questions for you guys is that the thing that and I just to bring it back to initiation and ceremonial and that kind of thing, it was very interesting because the thing that really brought me back from the brink, and I like that you used that term, you know, because we are, I think everyone, most people are at the brink right now, and I think that we're in a spiritual crisis. The thing that brought me back from the brink was actually initiation. And I think it made me, but that's what it did. When I tell people about initiation, it didn't make me this, you know, a grand hierophant, this wizard who could summon the sylphs to do his his dishes. Um, what it did was it made me more human. It made me more human. You know, we use a fourfold elemental system of initiation where you're going through the different, you know, and a lot of it sounds very psychological, but it's all the same thing, right? It's like you can't separate every spiritual or every physical action. Every mental action has a spiritual consequence. It's like trying to move one side of a coin without moving the other. We are a holistic being, ultimately, or at our root, and in sort of grouping the elemental self into these four subsections, it forces you to deal with these things that are traditionally human. You know, you work with, like, in the earth grade, you're focused on things like your finances, your home, your body. I even started gardening. I started woodworking, and these things changed my life. In the next 10 years, I would end up becoming a carpenter and a gardener and growing my own food with my fiance. So I think that to tie it back into the initiatic component or the esoteric component is that a lot of people will go into initiation for the audience here. A lot of people go into initiation thinking that you're going to somehow level up an octave and transcend this. What it's really trying to do is re-engage you, because like the things that you guys have touched on here today is that, you know, many things are an act of magic. You know, there are things that are very organically human that are magical. As a matter of fact, it's, you know, angels don't do magic, right? Because angels, that's just part of their reality. Humans are the only species that can do magic because it's this strange intermediary position that we occupy. So that's I think that that's something to think about within the context of everything you guys have said. But I want to give you both the opportunity here to talk about anything that you've got forthcoming, whether that's an event or a class, or are you speaking at any conferences?
What have I got coming up? Some papers, um, some conferences. Yeah, so I've got, like I alluded to before, the Contact in the Desert. It's like what's it referred to as, like, the world's premier conference in non-human intelligences and stuff. So it's, yeah, that's in California at the end of the month, in Palm Springs, and it's two talks. One of them is about this you know, you're saying about your interest, I can, like, what these entities are, and maybe they, like, in the ufological kind of way, that there's an interdimensional aspect, and there's so many of these theories, you know, and it's like utter speculation, and interdimensional, ultra terrestrial, which is like they've actually emanating from within the earth, and are like a related to, like, the theory they're like a breakaway civilization, and that have become much more advanced in, like, a different trajectory, and or they're like I said, the extra, it's called the extra tempestural model, like us from the future, and da, da, da. So I kind of try to think about how you can think, if we're all conflating them or not being able to choose between one or the other's best explanation, trying to, like, synthesize it all, so that they can be all, like, column A, column B, and column C. So it's kind of like that, but it's in the context of what we were talking about, like the possible trajectory of our civilization of going, like, the regrettable transhuman way, as opposed to the what would be the auspicious, like, hyperhuman trajectory, and but that's still being, you know, they're acting in a godlike kind of capacity, and therefore there's the spiritual manner, and the fact that if they're traveling through time, then that is the most proximal dimension which we know exists, and so therefore it is actually an interdimensional phenomenon, and could even be extraterrestrial, because if this Earth goes to shit, Musk is already sending people, sending people to Mars and terraforming it and whatever. So there could be this this, what's it called, like a speciation, ultimately, if we end up evolving in a totally other environment, even though it'd be like humanized for us and everything. So it's kind of extraterrestrial and blah de blah. Like just seeing current trends and like trying to make it not absurd. So that's one of them. And the other one is actually about near-death experiences, which are actually, if you didn't know that they're near-death experiences, any average person would say that they're like abduction experiences, because they have contact with what we would consider as extraterrestrial, and there's UFOs, and it's very, very explicit. And like thinking about the different mechanisms of that from like a just sociological perspective, like it's like we are changing the afterlife is like one of my favorite quotes from Jeff Kripal, depending on our social progression, or quote unquote progression, like just how it's changing. Now everything is AI dominated, and we have near-death experiences from the past which already forewarn of our development in terms of like ecological crisis and nuclear development and stuff. And so I have 3 near-death experiences which I've located, which portend to or that they're transmitting the AI as this devastating portent, that's what we're going to experience in the future. These NDEs have AI in them, and transmitting these kind of concepts for the purpose of who knows, like telling us that this is possible, this has already happened, or it's depending on our where our consciousness goes in the future, or like a neuroscientific perspective, like how can we subsume this into just brain mechanisms, like if many people were having these weird types of NDEs which we don't usually consider standard, which are deeply technologically like the aesthetic of it and how they're constructed. So yeah, that's the things that I've got going on for the next month or so. Yeah.
Awesome. Carl?
Yeah, so quite a lot this year. I've got South by Southwest coming up in June, which is the first time it's happened in London, and I'm going to be on a panel talking about sleep tech. Again, really looking at technology for sleep. And of course, it seems absurd, but this is kind of the only space that we have left to really rest. But of course, there are transhuman inroads to make sure that we work in our sleep with the Luma band, which is from a company called Prophetic, which apparently will create lucid dreams on demand. So a bit like Strange Days, where we see this technology that will both allow us to have these lucid dreams. So who has the wildest dreams wins. That will kind of be the new film, I suspect, because we'll also be able to record those dreams. And we're already seeing technologies using AI and computer vision to record the visual cortex whilst you're asleep. So dream technology is not far away. And of course, if we create that technology, then the actual practice of lucid dreaming, all the work that goes into that practice, that initiation will fall away, I suspect, because so many people will just take the shortcut. And then I'm doing a big show at the medicine site for Solstice, a museum of consciousness there. And the theme of that one is sound as ritual. And then doing Museum of Consciousnesses at New College, Oxford, where we met initially. So that's the new series coming up there. And then a Museum of Consciousness over in Bergen with Siri. So we're planning a sort of black metal version of the Museum of Consciousness. So you're very welcome to that. That'll be in October. And then off to Egypt for 8 private permissions in Cairo, including hiring the Great Pyramid, doing sound experiments in there, and going underneath the Giza Plateau. Wow. Into the Osiris shaft, and seeing the water and seeing the intact sarcophagi that are still present. And then off to the Amazon. Just been invited. I've just come back from Portugal, where I did a big event there in Sintra. And off the back of that gig, I've been invited to the Amazon to do a Museum of Consciousness in the landscape, playing music, not to humans, but to the animals, the plants and the insects and the trees, as part of COP30. And then over to Mexico to do a massive Museum of Consciousness on a regenerative farm, where we're going to have about 50 artists, again, playing music in nature for for the weekend.
Incredible, incredible. So as we get to the end of the conversation, everybody gets a canned question. We've covered a tremendous amount of ground, which I think is very good. A lot of it's going to be pretty fresh, pretty new to people tuning in. But for anybody interested in exploring some of these avenues a little bit more, could you recommend 3 introductory books?
I've thought about this before, like everyone always asks, and it's so hard because when you read a lot of books, but I just thought about yesterday that Romance of Reality is by Bobby Azarian, and it's not like explicitly about everything we've been talking about, but it really is in the broader scheme of things, because it's really about complexity theory, and because he's a cognitive scientist, and how we can reconcile materialist reality with meaning and purpose in not like a kind of fantasy kind of way, but like employing complexity theory ultimately, that the world is complexifying, the universe is complexifying, life is the fundamental like unit which complexifies reality, and therefore is part of reality, and it's computing of meaning like isn't therefore fabrication because it's part of reality, and it has like a really beautiful transcendent like eschatological like arc, like, and it eventually goes quite like far out for some people in terms of the implications of that, like other beings, like godlike beings, creation of reality, time looping. And on time loops, that's the other book I recommend by Eric Wargo, Time Loop. So he's basically looking at precognition, but it does so in such a sophisticated way, like it's a thick book, and he goes into psychoanalysis, how that's related to precognition as you wouldn't normally think, but because precognition is like similarly what we're saying about magic, and how parapsychological phenomena and psychedelics come into that are really about magic, like the unconscious is dovetailing fundamentally with all of those things. So therefore psychoanalysis comes into it, but it's seemingly paradoxical. He actually resolves it, like idea of time loops, like you have precognitions, but there is no possibility of changing it, because he adopts a block time universe theory, but it's not like, not everyone agrees with block time. And the other third one would be Phi. So Phi is by this psychiatrist doctor who invented one of these main prevailing theories of consciousness, which is integrated information theory, and it's very sophisticated. And like, there's a recent survey that said to scientists, like, what do you think would be the theory that actually solves consciousness? And most people said IIT, this theory, and they asked why, because we don't understand it. So it must be that which will solve consciousness. But this whole book is a kind of a fictitious exposition of what his theory is. So instead of looking at all the crazy maths that no one gets, it's like a journey of Galileo meeting all these other incredible luminaries from the past, and having these conversations almost like a lucid dream kind of manner, where the reader then gains the benefit of understanding through this way what this grand theory of consciousness is, in terms of brain mechanisms. And they're the best books that I could recommend.
Awesome. Carl?
So just off the top of my head, I think I could not recommend enough Philip K. Dick's Valis. I think that was such a game changer from my perspective of having these sorts of shocking pink light sort of laser experiences. So check out Valis. Then Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra, such an inspirational book from my childhood. And then recently I've been involved in this book here, Abyssal Arrows, which is kind of a look at a modern retake or uptake of Nietzsche and his Thus Spoke Zarathustra focus. So spiritual leadership inspired by Thus Spoke. And in that book, I outline, again, this hyperhuman, transhuman debate, but looking at that sort of dialectic from the perspective of Nietzsche's archetypes in this book, where he talks about the last man, the overman, and the afterworlds man. So often, Nietzsche's considered a transhumanist, but I think he's very much more a hyperhumanist, because the last man is the transhumanist that he speaks of. The last man is the man that just wants to get through life. It's the Gnostic experience. It's the anything to get through it, waiting for Godot kind of sort of scenario. Whereas the overman is really the hyperhuman. That's the North Star. And as I've spoken of in this call, I think hyperhumanism may have existed, may still exist, but it's certainly something that's not common. I think we're all transhumans if we have an addiction to our phones, which most of us do. So it's really about, let's look at what the overman can bring, and the afterworlds man, of course, is just your average religious nut that wants to preserve living till they're dead, and what comes after. So that's my three.
Beautiful. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. This was a really fun conversation. We're looking forward to everything you guys have in the future, and I truly hope that we get to, all three of us, be together again at some point in the near future. So thanks for coming on.
It was so cool being here. Really interesting combo. Thank you so much, Ike. I love what you're doing, and meeting you has been really wonderful as well. Like getting into magical kind of world a bit more as well. So thank you, and hopefully see you soon.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing us both on together, because Pascal and I have got a lot to discuss, and we don't often have the time. So it's been really great to do this, and long may it continue. And let's see if we can do another one in a year and see what's changed.